To see y'all this year, and we did have a few of those weeks where, because of last Sunday or Fellowship Sunday, we didn't get to have evening service, and I was worried about tonight with how it's going to be, but God be glorified, we didn't get the horrible stuff, and I'm thankful for that. And do be in prayer, because they're saying there's a really good chance that we could get 2 to 3 inches of snow the latter part of this coming week, which snow is not fun, but that's better than freezing rain. Freezing rain's what scares me each time, and the ice. But let's definitely be in prayer. We definitely want people to be safe and careful, and we're going to be watching all that to the best of our ability. Now, I'll tell you, when it comes to meteorology, I can rely on that little app as much as anybody else, which means until it happens, we still don't know. But we'll be in prayer for it. We are looking at more about Jesus, and This night we're going to be looking in John chapter 4. We were in John chapter 4 last time, but we were looking at the woman at the well. Here we're going to be in the last part of it, verses 46 through 53. 54 is there too, but 53 is kind of where we're going to. And there's a few things that's happened since then. We have Jesus speaking to his disciples and telling them that he has food of his own, which he's talking about a sustenance and enjoyment of the work of the Father. He also teaches them that the real harvest isn't going and getting the grain, though that is a harvest, but the real harvest for the kingdom is going out and doing the work of the kingdom. People being saved, people that have been cultivated, coming to the knowledge of Jesus and growing. All of that goes into play. Jesus has a ministry among this area of Samaritans, and then he goes back into Galilee where he is welcomed, but it's not like he is fully welcomed. He is more celebrated, but we've seen people like that before where, wow, it's so good to have you. They're going to celebrate you, but they're really using you. And that Jesus has to deal with that a lot, where one well-known family wants to have him at a banquet, but it's more to honor them than it is to listen to him. We shouldn't do that. We should never speak or talk the talk to try to get the honor of, look at me, I'm such a great Christian. We should listen to Jesus and live for Jesus. But the point of this tonight is Jesus does another miracle. But in this, we find out a little bit more about Jesus. This is something we're going to see more of, and sometimes a little more pushy. But the point that we're going to learn tonight is that Jesus would challenge people. I'm not talking about arguing. I'm not talking about the one alpha getting in the face of another alpha. No, I'm talking about challenging someone to go further. Pushing them, nudging them. Parents do that sometimes. When a child says, I can't do it, but the parent has watched their child for years and knows, oh yes, you can do it. But they find a way to challenge them. Maybe it's through a nicely worded way of putting it. Perhaps it is the way of, you know what, I'll put some money down that you can do it. Or, whatever it is. Jesus challenges a little harsher, but this challenge gets met. So let's look at the context here. Let's look at this. And this is a narrative, or there's another word that's oftentimes used, pericope. It looks like it's periscope, but there's no S. Pericope. It's an actual hermeneutical word. It's referring to kind of the grouping of this story, or this paragraph almost, if you will. So, Jesus came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and implored him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Now, looking at verses 46 and 47, let's go ahead and see this context. Jesus comes back into Cana, and John reminds his readers, this is where Jesus turned the water into wine. And that was his first public miracle. Well, now he comes back to Cana, and he's going to have another miracle, but it's going to be in a different way. When he gets there, he's in Galilee, and there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. Capernaum is anywhere from 16 to 18 miles away. That's not a short journey. For me and you, it's like, hey, hop in the car, I'll be there in 10 minutes. For them, no, I'm going to be walking for a day plus. And with the way the terrain was, it would be at least a solid day, because they would actually have to walk down, up, down, up, down. The northern part, Galilee, is a very hilly area. There are areas such as the Jezreel Valley that is flat, but most of it are these large hills that protrude out of the ground, and you have to traverse that. Now, where Capernaum is on the Sea of Galilee, but there are hills all around. So guess what? You're going to have to traverse those hills. Cana is on a hill. So that 16, 18 miles ain't going to be easy. He hears Jesus is in the area. Word will travel fairly fast, but he hears about it, and he goes to Jesus because he wants to have his son healed. Now, this isn't like, okay, my son, he's got a cold. Apparently, this was worrisome. He was truly worried for the health and perhaps even the life of his son. And as we will find out later, he has a fever. Now, you know as well as I do, if fevers persist, that ain't good. They understood that as well. Now, an interesting thing to keep in mind here is the word nobleman. What does that mean? One translation puts it as royal official. Who could he be? The scholarly census here is that most likely this was a court official that worked for or under Herod Antipas, who was a tetrarch. This was one of the sons of Herod the Great. But after Herod the Great's first son, I believe it's Archelaus, failed in rule, Rome said, we're redoing that, take you out, we'll set up some of your brothers as tetrarchs. And that would basically be regional ruler. So not really a king, but still royal. And so in this area is Herod Antipas's regional rule. So this was very likely a person, a court official that worked for him. He could have been a Gentile because Herod Antipas did employ Gentiles. But normally John tells us these things. So likely he's a Jew, but very possibly a Jew that's been influenced by the Greco-Roman lifestyle. So he may not be a very dedicated religious Jew. We're not told. But he hears that Jesus has come to the area, and he goes to him. Now, he's going to be walking for a solid day. He's walking, he gets there, and it says that he went to him and implored him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. He's been with a fever long enough, in the situation long enough, they know how easy people die. Now remember, we live in a time period where there's so many things that used to kill people that we have pills for, or shots for. And quite honestly, the level of death, or I forgot what the terminology is, but basically the point where there's a lot more death versus a lot less death is different for us. Some of the things that we go get a surgery for, or go get shots for, killed our children of our great-grandparents. It's very different today. We are blessed in a lot more ways than we think. A kid gets the chicken pox, it's no big deal. In fact, we don't even hear the chicken pox anymore. But kids used to die from a lot of things, and to them, they saw this. Death was part of their lives. They saw family and friends die at ages that we wouldn't see on a normal basis. So they have a good idea that death is on the way. He recognizes that. Notice, though, he didn't just come and ask, he implored him. I like that translation because the concept in the Greek here is he kept asking. He kept begging. Now, I'm going to be honest. If I believe someone could heal my son or my daughter and they were on the point of death, I'd probably be on my knees begging them. I'd probably be imploring them, please. Now, notice what Jesus says. This almost sounds calloused in verse 48, but I don't think it is. I think it's one of those instances where it's being pushed. He's challenging. It's a harsh challenge. It ain't as harsh as Jesus can get, but it's meant for a purpose. Jesus said to him, unless you people, now the people there is oftentimes in italics, it's not in the Greek, but the you is plural. If you go with the old King James, it would probably be ye, wouldn't it? Ye, so it's a plural. In English, modern English, you can be singular or plural. You got to pay attention to the context. Sometimes it's just too hard to know. You all see signs, unless you all see signs and wonders, you will by no means believe. The concept of the Greek here is it's undetermined if you will believe. You got to have all this in order to believe, in order to trust. Now, I want you to recognize Jesus does not have a problem with people looking at the evidence and coming to faith. He has a problem with people asking for more and more and more and more evidence when there's enough evidence, right? Do we get upset when, whether it be our children or family, ask for more and more and more when there's more than enough to make clear what we wanted or what's necessary? That's the same thing Jesus is doing. He's not being mean, but he is being a little harsh for the purpose of getting a point across. Now, this is a challenge for this individual. Now, imagine, in fact, I know of a preacher that had something like this. I'm sure you've heard of type A personalities, type B personalities. I didn't know until a year ago there are type C and type D personalities. And I was called a type C personality, and I laughed and looked it up, and I go, well, I could actually see what they were talking about. Most of the time we hear of type A, and type A personalities are oftentimes, I'm a type A personality. And I guess as the type C personality, I'm like, well, that's good for you. You know, I just don't care. But with type A personalities, they're very effort-oriented. They get things done. They may or may not be highly organized, but they want to get things done. They can't sit still. They got to do things, and that's fine. But they also can be challenged, and they'll take on that challenge. One preacher I know had a problem with, I think for him it was smoking, and he wanted to stop, but he couldn't. All right, he felt like he couldn't stop, so he went and he wanted to get one of those things that they use to try to help with stopping. And the doctor realized, he said, "You're a type A personality." He goes, well, and he didn't know what it meant, and he said, "You can't stop smoking. You couldn't possibly. If you tried, you couldn't stop smoking." And this preacher said, "I'm going to do it just to prove you wrong," and he did. And so what that doctor actually did was he wrote him a prescription. The prescription wasn't on paper. It was in the form of a challenge that was needed to get the point across. This preacher didn't need any special gum or any of that stuff. He needed to be challenged in the right way. Now that's a good doctor. Now, that preacher probably didn't like that doctor at that moment. But I know he said later on, he told me and others, he said, the guy was right, worked. And so when you look at it honestly, we oftentimes think of, that's not nice, or that's nice, and we think things are moral by nice or not nice. Sometimes you have to be a little harsh or a little more callous, and it's a very moral thing to do, but we have allowed our culture to think of nice and not nice is the key to everything. No, it's not. So Jesus says this, and it's a challenge. If you trust me, I don't have to go down and do it. This isn't Jesus being lazy. He is challenging this man. This man had at least some faith, right? He came to Jesus. Amen. But do you have to have Jesus have you by the hand the whole way to believe he can actually heal you? Now, this is a push by Jesus because not many miracles were known from the Old Testament that were done through a distance. All right? One that can be considered that would certainly be the prophet Elisha, when he had I think it was Naaman, the Syrian general that came to him, and he tells him, go to this river and bathe 7 times, immerse yourself 7 times. And Naaman at first is angry. This is, why would I do that? He expects this prophet to do something, special right there. Well, his servant finally says, well, what would it hurt? So he goes there, and on the 7th time, he's cleansed. Wow! That's a distance, okay? But the majority of the majority of miracles were not done via distance or via distance. They were done oftentimes close together. So even in Greco-Roman world, where they had their own stories of miracles or signs, they were rarely done at a distance. So Jesus is challenging him. The nobleman said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." He's imploring Jesus. Just heal my son. Jesus said to him, "Go your way. Your son lives." Not saying your son will. Your son lives. He's alive. He will live. Don't worry about it. So the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he went his way. And as he was now going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, "Your son lives!" Now, you can imagine, if he is an important person, his own servants would obviously care about him and about the family. And it sounds strange to us because whether it be slavery or paid servitude, we don't really imagine. We're so individualistic, we don't oftentimes get that. And I'm not saying that culture is necessarily right. I'm just saying it was. It existed. Now, if any of y'all have ever watched, and you may not want to, you may not like British shows, if you've ever watched a show called Downton Abbey, I'll surprisingly tell you, I actually find it kind of enjoyable, or really enjoyable. But at one point, you have some servants, and they're paid. They don't care about the family. They're just doing the work. Other servants, they are invested in the family. That's our family, even though they're servants. They're not part of the gentry, but they have an interest in their heart on how and what happens with those people. The same thing happened in ancient times. Some people that were sold into slavery or born into slavery, some of them did come to love the people they were enslaved to. Does that mean we have to agree with slavery? No. But we can recognize that there could be some love that developed. Well, they come and they say, your son lives. They want him to know about it. We don't have to know all the details of this official in his house, but we do recognize that there's care here. Then he inquired of them the hour when he got better, and they said, yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him. So the father knew that it was at the same hour in which Jesus said to him, your son lives. You ever had those moments where you have just the hair on the back of your neck stands up, and you have that prickly feeling go across your back? I wonder if this was such a moment to him, just that realization. Did he trust Jesus? Yes, but trust doesn't mean 100% all the way, does it? See, here's the problem. When we think belief or trust or faith, we think it's 100%, but we act in faith every day in a lot of ways and a lot of things. Technically, a good definition of belief is looking at the evidence and coming to a conclusion of 50% plus 1. Okay, that's basic belief, right? I believe this is the way it's going to happen. You do that every day when you get on the road and you believe the person on the other side is going to stay on the other side of those double yellows. Okay? Stronger belief goes further. Can you have good faith in God? Absolutely. Does it mean it's going to be 100% in every moment? No, because you're human and I'm human. And we're going to have those moments where I trust Jesus, but I don't fully understand, and so I'm having trouble stepping out in faith. That's not abnormal, but Christ does challenge us to go further. He never denied this man's faith. Okay? He never denied that he had faith, but he was almost implying that your faith is connected with me having to be there. Your faith is shallow. And so he challenged him. Sounds a little callous the way he did it, but kind of like with that preacher I know and going to the doctor, the prescription worked. And here it does. He's challenged enough where he accepts the word of Jesus and he goes. He came out of faith. He goes in a newfound faith. And then when he hears, his faith strengthens to a greater deal. You can have faith and it gets strengthened over time. Now, I cannot say for sure, but I wouldn't doubt if he was 75, 80% trusting in Jesus when he walked away. He didn't run. He walked away. He left, believing that his son would be healed. But when he hears the news and on the exact hour in which Jesus had said it, what you bet that went from whether it's 75, 80, whatever, 90% to 100%. No doubt about it. That's my Messiah right there. But notice, he himself believed. This is a very strong translation in the English here, because in the Greek it's he himself. A lot of times English translations will just say he believed. They'll leave out that himself, because it's almost a little overstated. But here's the point. In the Greek, it's being used to emphasize. He himself believed, and his whole household. I read something earlier, and I thought that was well put. We live in such a Western individualistic society that we forget, or we are unaware, or we just don't think about the way things were back then, where they were not in highly individualistic societies. They were individuals. They recognized that. They recognized their individual responsibilities. But they were also a community society where families played a big part. And even broader families had a big thing where even though I may live in my household with my family, my cousin's family, we are part of a clan, and that matters. So if someone disrespects him, that's really a disrespect for the whole family. And so we oftentimes misunderstand when it says something like The whole household believed because one person believed. Also, they don't really have faith on their own. No, it's not like that. Think of it this way. Think of someone in your family. Maybe it was a grandfather, a grandmother, someone who had a large part in your life. And when they said something, you listened. When they made a point, you took careful attention to it, and it would influence you, not simply because they said it, but because you trusted them in what they said, right? You'd had enough dealings for years for them that when they said something, you knew that you could trust that they meant it. Now, maybe times that by about 10, and that's the kind of society we're dealing with here. So when this official believes, his household naturally, well, if he believes and he's looked at the evidence, I can trust him. I'm going to trust that Jesus too, because if they changed him, then by golly, I know that he's good for me. Is that really all that different from others that looked at Saul of Tarsus after he was changed and go, well, if God changed him, then I can trust that God, right? The only difference is that's a distant look versus I know this person that's been changed up close. There's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean so-and-so believes. So the whole household, you are commanded to believe. That's not the meaning. He wielded such influence that they saw the change in him and they believed as well. They individually believed, but he, in their collective house, made a difference. Never look past the difference we can make in the lives of those that we are around. We oftentimes put it to the side. We shouldn't. We may not live in that kind of society, but guess what? We can demand respect just by living right. We can demand respect just by caring. We can demand respect by honest, accurate adherence to God's word. Now, the last verse here is a side point, and that's why I didn't include it into the main thing. It says, this again is the second sign of Jesus did when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. Now, this sounds a little odd because Nicodemus says in the previous chapter, no one does these miracles, these signs, unless God's with him. If he's only done one sign, one miracle, how can that be said? That's clearly an error, right? No. Notice the context here. This is the second sign Jesus did when he came out of Judea into Galilee. It's not referring to any miracles he did in Judea. John is focusing on the broader area of Galilee here. Now think of it this way. We may think of something that happened, say, in war. This is the big battle that happened outside of this area. Is that the only battle? No, but that's the big battle outside of that area. And so that's kind of the thing that we're looking at here. John is giving us a number of certain miracles, probably ones that they had memorized. And he's identifying where they're at, and that's how he's counting it. Because he goes on in the end of his gospel, and he says what? If we were to write down everything he did, we wouldn't have enough space. So he's even telling you, I had to condense it. Can you imagine what it would be like? Now, be careful, things you watch, but there's that show they made called The Chosen, and there's good parts of it, there's negative parts of it. But one part I thought was really good was Jesus is healing people. And I mean, there's a line of people, and they're getting healed. They come to him, they get healed. And Matthew is trying to write down as much as he can about them and asking, what did he heal you of? It's just becoming overwhelming. Whether or not it happened like that, we don't know. But the thing I like the concept of is they couldn't keep up with it all. What Jesus did was on a broad scale, and they could only tell the important things. They'd love to have told every little thing. They did not have the ability. And that would probably take away from the broader point. Can you get lost in the details? Sure. And none of the gospel writers wanted you to get lost in the details. They wanted you to see the forest. So the point that we have here, the detail and the tree in the forest we're seeing here is Jesus would challenge. And it seems harsh, but when you see the end result, you go, okay, that was good. There was a time 2 generations ago, maybe a generation ago, but definitely 2 generations ago, where children and people were challenged. And it wasn't taken personal like it is now, to the extent. Now, someone gets challenged. How dare you? And then they finally learn the lesson and go, oh, I'm proud they challenged me. It's just, we've gotten very soft. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad, as much I'm saying we've got to be able to see historically things are not the same then as they are now. And so Jesus is not being disrespectful. he's nudging, he's pushing, he's challenging the faith. There are times he's going to say to his disciples, where's your faith? And they've followed him up to that point. They've had faith, but their faith is not as deep, not as wide as it needs to be. And so Jesus challenges them. Like a parent goes, come on, you can do better than that. But it was a C. I know you can do an A. But right now, I'm just pushing you to a B. Well, with that being said, are there any questions or comments?